And welcome to another treatment of the International Sunday School lesson. Today's lesson is entitled Humble Faith. And it's taken from Luke, the 7th chapter, verses 1 through 10. And it's for October the 20th, 2019. It's the fall quarter lesson number 8. Now, a little background information on today's lesson. This story is contained both in the book of Luke and also in the book of Matthew. And in both places, it's right after that great sermon, the Sermon on the Mount, and in the book of Luke, that's called the Sermon on the Plains. And this story is right after this event, that sermon. And also, too, I want to just make a mention that one of the central characters in this story today is about the centurion. They were some fairly powerful people in that day and time. Basically, they were called centurions because they were over a group of soldiers somewhere in the neighborhood of 100 soldiers. Now, they didn't always have exactly 100, but it was somewhere in that neighborhood of 100 soldiers. And that's as I said, one of the central characters of this story is a centurion. And he is what was referred to at the time as a God-fearing Gentile. Wasn't, as far as we know, a full converted Jew. He hadn't converted to Judaism, but he was what they referred to as a God-fearing Gentile. He was sensitive to the right and wrong that was contained in the Torah, and he was very sympathetic to the Jewish people and would be supportive of things like the synagogue and such as that. And so that is the character of this centurion. And also, too, at the time that Jesus was on the earth and within the Roman economy, a servant was basically, you had no responsibilities to a servant. They were basically just a tool to be used by you any way you see fit. So the compassion and concern that we're going to see out of this centurion is a little bit uncommon during this time frame. Okay, starting with Luke 7:1. When Jesus had finished saying all of this to the people who were listening, he entered Capernaum. Now, this is talking about he had finished the sermon and he was heading on to Capernaum. Luke 7:2 and 3. There was a centurion's servant whom his master valued highly, was sick and about to die. The centurion heard of Jesus and sent some elders of the Jews to him, asking him to come and heal his servant. Now, there's some very awesome things contained in these couple of verses. And let's consider the character of this centurion. First off, we notice that contrary to the people of the day, he had compassion and concern for his servant. This was a servant that he valued highly. He obviously was had a friendship with this servant. And the servant had become sick. And rather than just discard him and go get another servant, the centurion wanted to see his friend, the servant, to be better. The other thing we want to notice here, how that this centurion had faith. He had heard how Jesus had healed people, and he had faith that Jesus would be able to do something for his servant. Also, too, we see here how that the centurion had a good rapport and a good testimony with the leaders of the people. He had asked the elders of the synagogue to go and search out Jesus and ask this favor of him that he would heal his servant. So we see how that the centurion had built up a testimony with these elders and with this synagogue, and had built up a relationship with them. So we see that there were some preconditions to this miracle happening. How that the centurion had been living a good life and was exhibiting faith prior to the miracle happening. Okay, Luke 7:4-5. When they came to Jesus, they pleaded earnestly with him, "This man deserves to have you do this, because he loves our nation and has built our synagogue." Now, it is highly unlikely that this centurion did what many of us have done in times past, helping build the church by hand. There was a period of time where I had spent a fair amount of time helping to build a church. I'm sure my lack of skill was probably still apparent in places in that church when it burnt down. Of course, I didn't have anything to do with the electrical or anything like that. I didn't cause it to burn down. But what I'm saying is my lack of skill and how some of the things may have been a little bit lopsided or what have you. I'm sure that that was still in that building as long as it stood. But getting back to the story here, this centurion, when it says he built that synagogue, there is it's very unlikely that he physically was working building that synagogue. These centurions were very wealthy people. They were people of power, and it is much more likely that the centurion actually supplied the resources for them to build their synagogue, which is a pretty significant donation to that synagogue. And these leaders of the people, they remembered the goodness and the righteousness of the synagogue. So they are pleading with Jesus earnestly. It wasn't just a casual asking him. They were trying to talk Jesus into doing something about this servant. Luke 7 and 6. So Jesus went with them. He was not far from the house when the centurion sent friends to say to him, Lord, don't trouble yourself, for I do not deserve to have you come under my roof. So we want to stop and consider this, that here is this man of influence, this man of wealth, who was humble. He did not put on big airs. He could have played the big shot. He could have treated Jesus as a second-class citizen and what have you, but he didn't. He recognized that this Jewish rabbi, that it was an uncomfortable thing for him to come inside the house of a Gentile, and he does not want to put Jesus through that. And by his humility, he's saying, Lord, don't trouble yourself. I am nothing but a Gentile. I'm nothing but a Gentile dog. I don't deserve for you to come under my roof. So here he is showing his humility. Okay, Luke 7 through 9. This is why I did not even consider myself worthy to come to you. But say the word, and my servant will be healed. For I myself am a man under authority, with soldiers under me. I tell this one, go, and he goes, and that one, come, and he comes. I say to my servant, do this, and he does it. When Jesus heard this, he was amazed at him. And turning to the crowd following him, he said, I tell you, I have not found such great faith even in Israel. Now stop and think about this. Now here is this Gentile who was not raised studying the Torah and not raised reading about the miracles, about Jonah and the whale, and how that the great plagues were struck, that Egypt was struck with the great plagues, and how the walls of Jericho came down. He had not been raised reading these stories. Yet, in his interaction inside the Jewish community of that day, and of hearing of the miracles that Jesus had performed, and hearing of the mighty words of the Son of God, that this Gentile had faith instilled in him. And he looked at how he has command in his life, and how he accepts orders from those above him, and how he gives orders to those below him. And he recognized that the Son of God had authority on this earth to issue commands, and that things happened because of the words he stated and the commands he gave. And so he says, demonstrating his faith, that all Jesus has to do is to utter the command, And the entire universe will bend to his will. And Jesus was amazed at him. Now, let's stop and think about what that means. Now, Jesus, being the incarnate Christ, the Son of God, the third member of the Trinity, Jesus is still amazed at him. Now, I don't believe that means that Jesus was not expecting him to act this way. I think that when it says amazed at him, that it is really talking more to the type of marveling at him. Looking and just, wow, look at this. Look at this. Wow. Now, there are times in our lives where we will know things are going to happen. For example, the beauty of a sunrise. You know the sun's going to rise. You have absolutely 100% confidence that the sun is going to rise. But there are times when you'll look at that sunrise and you will be amazed at it, at its beauty, at its majesty. And when it says that Jesus was amazed at this Gentile, that is how I picture that to be. Not that he was stunned that the man had the faith and was unexpected, but that he saw this marvelous thing, this faith in this centurion, and he stepped back and was amazed at it and pondered it and enjoyed seeing it. He was amazed at it. Luke 7:10, then the men who had been sent returned to the house and found the servant well. So we see here where there are results for that faith. And we need to be really, we need to remember that we need to apply our faith when times are hard. Now, a couple of concluding thoughts. First off, I want to really reiterate the fact that this centurion had been a righteous man. He had done some good things, that he had been a man who would be thoughtful of people, that he was a man who would demonstrate that he cared about people. And we need to go through our lives with that same kind of mentality of being concerned about people and to be sensitive to the needs of the people around us. The other thing too is the fact that this man, even though things were not going well at that moment, this man demonstrated faith. He believed God was going to take care of things. And that's one of the things that we need. We need to let go of our worry, let go of our fears, and to demonstrate faith that God's going to take care of things when we ask Him. And the other thing too is this man, who was a very powerful person, a centurion in that day, was a person of influence who had the capacity to sway things. They were held responsible for things. And yet, even though he had all of this authority, all of this power, this man demonstrated humility. And we need to always be a humble people. Because friends, let me tell you something, and you remember this every day of your life, as I should remember every day of my life. God resists the proud, but giveth grace to the humble. Not one time, not some of the time, but all the time. We need to be a humble and meek people, because pride is that number one thing that will get us in trouble quicker than anything. And it will put a barrier between us and God. You know, Lucifer was doing pretty good up in heaven, and he was there, and people respected, the other angels respected him, and he was just having a good old time up in heaven, up until he wanted to, his heart was filled with pride, and he wanted to set himself up as God, and he brought sin into the universe. And all the destruction that you see around you is a direct result of pride. Fight pride at every turn. Every time you feel like it is coming into your life, make sure you fight pride. Well, friends, good Lord willing, I'll be back with you next weekend.